what I hope will have changed is that we have been able to help redefine the global energy infrastructure, shifting power literally and I guess figuratively away from these antiquated kind of like mainframe computers, went to distributed networks. I kind of view the central power plants the same way, these antiquated centralized generation systems to smart and resilient distributed cogeneration and microgrids.
Hey, welcome back, Solar Warriors. Thank you for taking time to be here. Of course, as we always say, the only non-renewable resource you've got is your time. I promise we're going to help you make that a great investment. So stick around all the way through this action-packed interview of insights, truly insightful conversation around microgrids, on-site energy, the complicated, messy part of distributed energy resources is that we really have to deal with dynamic environments that create complex calculus, as it were. And lo and behold, there has been an evolution in the science-based, the math behind modeling that helps us build better on-site energy systems. One of the companies on the forefront pioneering this evolution in science-based technology is a company called Xendee. And I've got their founder, Adib Naslé, on the episode today to talk about why it's been so hard traditionally to figure out the size and shape and yield requirements and technology inputs, the output expectations of these microgrid or on-site energy systems as we move ever forward in our clean energy transition away from fossil fuel, away from reciprocating engines as backup power sources, and moving into integrating batteries and solar and small modular nuclear reactors and many other things. How do we integrate data centers, hyperscaling data centers? How do we think about ultra-fast EV charging at places like travel centers and transportation generally? This electrification of our economic centers requires so much energy. How do we manage, measure, and make all of that financially viable? How do we de-risk it? All of that and more is part of the conversation today. I'm so glad that you're here. We talk about this kind of stuff each and every week, twice a week on Suncast. You can listen to more than 800 such episodes in our back catalog if you go to suncast.media. For now, we are going to go deep on the topic of the techno-economic feasibility and financeability of microgrids with Xendee. Welcome to Suncast. Adib, as the CEO of Xendee, I have long wanted to get a chance to spend time with you. So thank you for taking time here today to be with us and share from your wealth of knowledge.
Thanks, Nico. Great to join you in conversation with your audience.
It's wonderful to finally get a chance to chat with you. You know, a lot of us old timers have been sort of familiar with how software has attempted to recreate, or rather sort of simplify this really complex problem around microgrids. Not only, how do we know what energy is needed, but how do we model the various inputs and outputs? And, as a Homer user long before it spun out of NREL, when I first saw Xendee, it immediately like light bulbs went off, and I knew that you guys had built something that was much needed in the industry. How do you describe the problem that you created your company to solve?
Fundamentally, the problem we're solving is energy independence and resilience.
Where's the market right now breaking down, or where is there a sort of a choke point with regards to that energy independence and resilience?
Well, the choke points have been the areas that we focused on actually addressing, and they've been fundamentally, I would say, 3 choke points. One has been around with energy systems, especially as they become more complicated, then the ability to understand and trust the outcomes that are being promised becomes challenging. I mean, if you just have a single energy source like a solar panel, people kind of understand what that does. But when we talk about cogeneration on-site systems that are delivering energy from a multitude of technologies to really deliver on independence and on resilience, it's a complicated system. And with complexity usually comes a bit of, I would say, anxiety, confidence, needs to be there. And the customer or whoever's adopting what you're suggesting really needs to have confidence in what the outcomes being promised are. So one was addressing at that just initial stage where somebody wants energy independence and they need resilience. What does that look like?
Yeah.
And how confident can they be in the outcomes that are being proposed to them? The second is really addressing the bankability of these systems. Bankability, I mean the financeability of these, getting institutional investors to have confidence as they put money behind these assets that they're going to get the return on equity that they expect in a reliable fashion. And that means you have to have a very sophisticated approach that passes that financial due diligence and the standardization that's needed to really treat them as an asset class versus one-offs. And then the third is, how do you deliver on the promises being made once the system's actually built and now operating? Because when you're operating, it's a dynamic environment. You need more power, you need less power. Sometimes the sun shines, sometimes the sun doesn't shine. How do you make sure that those promises that, people, made an investment in and decided to put the effort to build that on-site system, how does that get delivered in an environment that's dynamic? And how do you make sure that within the unknowns, you have the ability to capture as much benefits, whether it's profits, savings, emission reductions, resilience, that system was designed to deliver. So those are the areas that we identified. And we first thought that we would tackle it on the bankability side and then address it on the bridging that gap between reality and the plan.
I imagine there are listeners who are relatively unfamiliar, not just with the category and the complexities you described, but with your company specifically. And I'm going to spell the name of your company so that you don't have to. Xendee is Xendee.
Yep.
Why don't you introduce us to Xendee and why it's designed to solve the problems that you've just enunciated?
Sure. The co-founders of the company, we've spent decades researching this. So what we have built and made available, although the company's young, is a result of decades of research and development and just a lot of work and experience in the area. And we decided that the best way to really tackle this is through a software platform that eliminates project financial and technical risk for our clients. And it's a software platform with a generative algorithm. Essentially, you tell it where the project is, what you want, what maybe already exists, and what your objectives are, or your customer's objectives. And it creates the optimal solution for you. And it also even comes up with how you should run the system. So just as I always use this analogy of, most of us in our cars now have a navigation system. And, we tell it where we are and where we want to go. And then it asks us some questions around our objective. Do we want the fastest time? Do we want the shortest distance? Do we want to avoid toll roads or not? And then based on that, traffic conditions, everything, it kind of gives us the optimal plan to get from point A to point B based on the objectives we've given it. And our software does the same thing, but from an energy perspective. So you tell where you are, where you want to be, what your objectives are. In our case, it's either economics, environmental, resilience, or some combination of these. And then it generates the optimal set of technologies you need, and then how you should drive them to get those outcomes in a reliable fashion. So it's an optimization platform with a physics engine behind it. Because it also, just as like with the navigation system, it knows what's a highway, what's a side street, what the traffic conditions are, how congested the roads are. We have the concept of cables and transformers and how loaded they are or how congested they are, so that as it comes up with a plan, it also has an understanding of the underlying distribution system, its limitations or constraints, and at the same time, the physics of the system to make sure that where power is being generated on site and where it's being consumed nearby, it can get from where it's being produced to where it's being consumed in a safe, efficient, and reliable manner. So it's a unique capability, but we felt that that was a level of sophistication that the market was lacking to really unlock the roadblocks that we had talked about earlier.
Thank you for that. Before I get deeper into the sort of the capabilities and what sort of what you might be replacing in the marketplace, what's in the name? You know, I've never seen this word. Is it a made up name? Like, how do you come up with the name Xendee?
Well, first I came up with a logo.
Oh, is that right?
I was in San Diego at Legoland, and they have this Bob the Builder kind of activity this thing there. I was there with my son. He was young at the time, and I was like, I like the Bob the Builder logo. It's a very universal image of a human, and you can just change his head to make him whatever. It could be anyone, any person, anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
So I kind of stuck with that in my head, and then I came up with this. I wanted like people all over the world putting their heads together to solve this future energy infrastructure challenge. And so I came up with these 4 kind of Bob the Builder logos, but the head was a common head that was a power icon. And that's where the X came from.
Okay.
And then, so I had to look for a name with an X. and then I settled on Xendee, because Zen is like a perfect flow, perfect balance, right? You kind of, in a Zen moment, whatever you want to, whatever analogy you want to use, but it's like a perfect flow, perfect balance. And I thought it had a good analogy to the perfect balance of energy that we wanted to solve. And then the DEE. So it's an X, but X you can pronounce as a Z, right? So Zen.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then DEE is distributed energy engineering. And the most important thing, Nico, the domain was available.
That's correct.
So it all worked out. So that's
beautiful.
The story behind the name. It started with a X logo, and then that logo evolved now to a more modern one. It was a fairly kludgy one that I'd come up with, and
so interesting. The North Star for branding and name creation in the modern era is their domain available?
Well, yeah, because you can come up with the greatest one, but if somebody has it, then you got to go back to the drawing board. But it was.
I know that all too well. Taken. I had no idea that there's this injection molded plastic company that made pool furniture called Suncast. When I started the podcast, Suncast. None whatsoever. Nor did I know that the Phoenix Suns basketball team had a podcast called Suncast.
Oh wow!
But anyway, nor did I know that there was a media company in Utah named Suncast. All these things.
But there was no Xendee. It was fairly out there, unique. So I felt it was just meant to be. So
that's fantastic. I like that. I knew, having had a few conversations with you, that there's more to it than simply the URLs available. I love the DEE being tied to distributed energy. I'm curious. You did a great overview of the problems that you were trying to solve. And the first time I talked to someone about this product, I was like, oh, it's a microgrid software. So like Homer, right? And I'm sure you hear that a bunch. What were the biggest frustrations that you all saw in how these systems were being planned and operated before Xendee came into being, right? Like how were most people doing this in the past?
Yeah. So that was kind of what we were staring at ourselves as well, is, boy, it sure doesn't look like a pretty process. And when something isn't really well standardized, streamlined, it becomes very difficult to actually say this is something that can be scaled on a global level. So what we were seeing was spreadsheets, internal tools, and a handful of dead-end legacy software. And you kind of have to cobble these things together. And people were sprinkling a bit of hopium on them and praying that it all works. And we didn't think that was the future of how you want to actually plan and implement a global energy infrastructure that addresses the needs of modern society going forward. So that's what we were looking at, was a very inefficient, bespoke, cobbled together process.
Non-repeatable.
With not a whole lot of confidence being exuded through that.
Yeah.
Which meant all of these things were depending on grants and taxpayer risk taking. And we didn't think that was the future. We're like, the future is, if you want actually to have commercial success and really build out the next energy infrastructure that we need as a country and also as a society worldwide,
Yeah.
it can't be like this.
Yeah.
And we've done enough research and we've done enough experience that we felt that we had a different path as to how to achieve that.
Are there examples that you observed in the marketplace that, because of this complexity, because of the bespoke nature, kept this industry as sort of a cottage industry, not able to secure sufficient financing or runway or buy-in, that you expect Xendee as a product helps to alleviate?
Yeah, I think, like I said, the bankability component, having a level of sophistication in the technology that's being used, and also being able to do it in a rapid and repeatable way, we felt was going to be important. So the roadblocks that were there was, again, this whole bunch of dead-end legacy software and spreadsheets being put together, everybody having their own little sauce on how they're going to do it. Mm-hmm. We needed to address that through a science-based, unbiased, the numbers are the numbers, and in a way that attracts a broader audience, communicates visually to multiple stakeholders. So whenever we looked at energy systems, there was always obviously the person or the company buying it. And then there's the folks. So there's that customer component. Then there is the financial decision makers component, right? The folks that are financing it. Then there's the engineers that are interested in having confidence around the technical design, and the policymakers and utilities too. And those tensions needed to all get aligned together, where the needs of the customer, the financier, the technical designers, and the folks that are involved on the policy or on the licensing side would all align together. Yeah. And we felt that we had a path towards that with the software that could be the keystone piece or the glue to bring those all together as a nice, smooth fabric.
Do you see this as like a winner takes most kind of technology play in the energy space? I mean, it's hard to, you don't.
You mean on the software side or just on
on the software side? Because I think that there are examples, certainly at the utility level, where there's like a winner takes most kind of software that becomes a de facto standard.
Yeah, I think with any sort of commercial B2B technology, having the best system, the best technology, and the highest adoption rate helps a lot. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's a winner take all, but the winner takes the majority and the rest, share in what's left. And I feel that in the commercial sector, inherently, it's structured that way because people inherently need to get multiple bids on anything. So there's always going to be multiple players. But to your point, the one that is the gold standard and is the thought leader usually has the majority of the share and drives a lot of the path of what the future needs are going to be.
Who's the customer for a product like Xendee?
It's actually several buckets, I would say, the customers fall into. And that's part of the flexibility and future-proofing that we built into the platform. Mm-hmm. When we're looking at how we can offer standardization through a science-based solution, how we can streamline and help our clients win more business and deliver more operating profits, whether it's electric, cogeneration, trigeneration energy systems, that flexibility with over 25 technologies. So, not just solar battery, but everything from just solar, battery, gas turbines, combined heat and power, hydrokinetics, absorption chillers, heat pumps, boilers, fuel cells, linear generators, backup generators. I mean, you name it, all the way to small modular nuclear reactors. That opens a lot of folks engaging with our platform. There's obviously energy planners, assistant planners, energy service providers, charging as a service, project developers. There's the equipment manufacturers themselves. They do not want to be commoditized into a single technology offering. They want to offer solutions, and they also want to be able to have an opportunity to get the service business as well. And being able to demonstrate in a science-based, unbiased environment the benefits of their solution to a customer in a very sophisticated way that improves their win rate is important for them. And consulting engineering firms, firms, and then governments as well. So we're the software behind the line at the for NEOM, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. We just finished work with Arizona State University for the government of Fiji for electrifying 300 remote islands out there. So we get involved in infrastructure that is national and state in scale, all the way down to hospitals, buildings, office buildings, campuses, military bases.
Is that directly with the government, or with a third party that they ran a process and hired, and that third party is working directly with you? Like, how does that typically shake out? I'm just trying to think of like
it typically comes out when they reach out to us based on the reputation of the team and the technology.
Yeah.
So
okay.
These are mostly people coming to us and saying, we'd like to work with you.
What are most of the customers replacing or supplanting perhaps in their existing process? You said spreadsheets, et cetera, but is it like they are able to kind of move away from or do away with existing tools or prior models?
Yeah, they've typically tried addressing it in some manner. And they found not only the difficulty, the multiple expertise that they now need, multiple systems that they need to kind of support, but also fundamentally the heavy costs that they have to incur just up front before they even get a yes or no on a project. So it's supplanting, I would say, maybe some of these inefficient approaches. So they immediately see not only the speed and the time savings, but also the sophistication that they can get with us. And then the internal processes that they have, the system is very flexible in kind of plugging in that way, because we also have APIs, so they can be programmatically called without even an interface. So if somebody has, like, let's say 1,000 sites and they don't know where to start and what each one of these sites needs, looking at them one by one will take forever. But through a programmatic call to our back end, they can get a high level view of what's needed, kind of rank and stack that portfolio in less than an hour. So when I say speed, we're 12,000 times faster than the next best alternative, just to give you an idea of the performance capabilities. Yeah.
That is tremendous.
And that's with a level of sophistication that just did not exist before. So when I say speed and sophistication, it's not like a marginal improvement. It's a complete leap over where things were.
Amazing. You mentioned 12,000 times faster than the next best alternative.
Yeah.
Talk to me a bit about what needed to be true for Xendee in its version right now to exist. If you'd started this company 5, 10, 15 years ago, why would it have failed?
Fundamentally, the first thing would be the demand for energy and deepening dependence on electrification and digitization would increase exponentially. So if you and I were talking 10, 15 years ago, everything was around energy efficiency, how to consume less electricity. So the plan wasn't that electricity was going to grow exponentially, but it would flatten out or maybe decline or maybe go up just slightly. But a lot of the growth would be balanced by efficiency gains. So if that was the case, then you wouldn't need on-site energy systems. Existing infrastructure and the way we've been doing things for the past 40 years would be good.
Yeah.
So that had to be different, where the demand and just the electrification of a lot of underlying processes that modern society relies on would increase exponentially. So I would say that's the first thing, is the demand growth.
Yeah.
The other is that the frequency and I would say the intensity of natural disasters would increase, and that the utility power grid would not be able to withstand that. That there would be this inherent need for resilience due to external events, and that those external events would become major and more frequent. So if we had less, obviously, environmental and natural disasters, then resilience wouldn't necessarily be an important thing either. 15, 20 years ago, just put some backup generators and you're good to go. Right. And then the third component, which, so the first one is really the growth of just energy demand.
Yeah.
The second is this external environmental events that we can't control that are causing blackouts and bringing business and residents and basically everybody in society into an event that can cause them to be without any modern amenities for a long time. Entire supply chains, everything from traffic lights to gas stations and everything else just shutting down. The third is the utilities would continue increasing tariffs while still not addressing the modernization of their grid and making it actually resilient. So as the cost of what they're selling increases, then the opportunity for having a better economic outcome through energy independence and having your own on-site energy system and taking control over a critical commodity that your business relies on, we felt that would become an important point. So those three had to be in and kind of happening in a way that compelled folks to look at a different way as to how we produce and consume energy. The demand, the weather events, and then the utilities continuously increasing the costs for the consumers.
Right. The continued focus on a return to investors at all costs.
Yeah, pretty much.
Effectively. All right. So
within a monopoly, right? So
right.
they're kind of territorially constrained.
Are there technical advantages? I presume things like AI, there are technical advantages that also have become available, maybe even that have been developed by your team that weren't possible with the compute power we had 10 years ago.
So you mentioned some legacy solutions. They were built on fundamentally different math. So really creating those new equations, those new algorithms, the new methods from a planning perspective, and then having the ability to integrate the underlying distribution network infrastructure. Those are all new, along with just making it all web-based, right. So that it's accessible anytime, anywhere, and on any platform, so that there's collaboration. Because this is a worldwide problem, and the expertise can be, not necessarily sitting in San Diego or Boston. It might be in Melbourne and Jakarta. So it really needs we felt that it was really important for a global effort, and to make that happen. And I'm not sure that would have been possible without kind of the solutions that were developed in the meantime on making web-based applications, what they are, kind of like even what we're using today to just communicate with each other, along with the underlying science that needed to be proven, peer-reviewed.
Yeah.
And then on the AI side, that's a critical piece, because if you recall, I said one of the challenges was, how do you make sure that what the plan promises you can actually deliver at the end of the day when the system's operating? And we've built a very sophisticated AI technology for forecasting, because you need to have reliable forecasting to be able to have what we call a forward-looking and adaptive way to control these systems. And to do that, you need AI that is able to reliably look into the future, come back with a quality of forecasting that then allows you to then orchestrate all these assets to work together. And fundamentally, I think AI is going to run these systems at the end of the day. But that would not have been possible 10, 15 years ago.
Fascinating. I want to drill down on something that I've heard you say a couple of times, and it ties back to what you just pointed out. Legacy systems built fundamentally on a different sort of math model. You've used the terminology science-based solution. I think that for folks who maybe don't understand what you're talking about, they might hear that as marketing jargon, right? Like, well, how are these guys how are the legacy systems somehow not science-based?
Right. So the legacy systems, so remember that whole navigation analogy I gave with, like, let's say you're using like Apple Maps or Google Maps or whatever, and you're saying I need to go from A to B. So let's go back like 15 years, right? We would pull out like a little map book, I don't know, Rand McNally or whatever it happened to be, right? And Nico, you would say, okay, we're going to take a left here. We're going to stop at this light. We're going to turn right. And this is the route we're going to take to get from where we are to where we want to go. And then imagine you have a button that says simulate. And you press that and it says, Nico, that would take you 15 minutes. And then I come and say, Nico, instead of taking a right, let's take a left. And then we go straight here. And then we go right again. And then we hit simulate, right? And then and it says, okay, that'll take 17 minutes. And we can play this game all we want forever and not necessarily land on the best way that Apple or Google is telling us to do, right? So when you do that, you get maybe 100 different outcomes.
Right.
Okay. And then you and me, we decide which one we're going to take. So it's a bias. There is some bias to it, right? So when I say science-based, it's like the algorithm is saying, this is your best path. Now you can take other paths, but this is your best path. And it's not putting any bias into it other than the objective you've given it and what it knows. And what it knows is what technologies you're interested in, how much they're going to cost, what their warranty is, and what the customer you're promising to them. And it comes up with it. So the science-based is, the bias is taken out and it's just giving you an unbiased outcome. The second is it's been peer reviewed with over 200 journal publications. Yeah. So it's not some black box that you just have to hope is giving you that right answer. It's gone through the gauntlet. And it's demonstrated the reliability of the outcomes for a variety of geographic locations and use cases.
I want to unpack here a little bit for the listener who we haven't been able to introduce your co-founder into the equation yet, because you went on a journey to kind of figure out what's the right best path to try to address this problem. Yeah, I know that there's been over 20 years of research and development that's gone into Xendee. Can you discuss a bit? You partner with Michael Stadler, who's your co-founder and CTO. He was for years at Lawrence Berkeley National Labs, and you also have a few other key individuals that I believe maybe are co-founders, or certainly Scott key Mitchell, early. Yeah, Scott Mitchell from UC San Diego. I'd love for you to give me the sort of the walk down of how you began to, as an entrepreneur, how you began to think about this problem at a business creation perspective, and what drew you to each of these as co-founders, specifically their skills and expertise, and why this is the right team to build this product.
Sure. So Xendee is actually my second startup. I had an earlier one that had started with my father, and it was around designing mission critical electrical distribution systems for mission critical facilities. And it was pretty sophisticated power engineering platform. And that had a private equity exit. But I got exposed to a lot of great people, great projects, and just some of the use cases that normally I would not have had any chance to. So it was a really incredible experience from that. At the same time, my experience had been with computer applications and power on kind of this battleship grade desktop Windows applications that really was focused on the power engineers of the world. And as I saw the future of energy, I got really intrigued with all the new technologies coming in. 20, 30 years ago, it was all the same stuff that was there 30 years before that General Electric, Westinghouse had all developed. There wasn't a whole lot of change and innovation happening. And when I saw that, with smart inverters and grid forming inverters and battery technologies and all these new ways to generate and store power, it really intrigued me. I'm just by nature very curious. And, but I didn't know how to do web application software. I just, just wasn't in my thing. So I went back to UC San Diego, and one of my instructors was Scott Mitchell. That's how I met him. And it was around enterprise web application development that the courses were around. At the same time, having gone to business school, I knew that no matter how fun and fancy something is, it doesn't matter if it doesn't actually have a business case with it.
Yeah.
And I really didn't have a lot of experience on the energy side around the economic optimization, the techno-economic optimization, the dispatch, how these assets can all come together. I came from a simulation background, and this whole optimization science was new to me, which was exciting for me as well. And when I reached out to my network that I had built over the years working in this space, everybody kept on pointing me to the work one person was doing at Berkeley Labs, and started collaborating with that group. And that's how I met Michael, and he agreed to come and join us as a co-founder. So a lot of the capabilities and the work that is reflected is based on Michael's research in the space for over 20 years, and then my own experience and background on the power system design side, and that experience coming together and just putting it together.
Yeah.
And then Scott really, putting the software development component of it in place for us.
What was the nature of the research, that 20 plus years of Michael's work at LBL that everyone kept pointing to?
It was around techno-economic and optimization and customer adoption.
Specifically of on-site
distributed energy systems. So he was in charge of all of the microgrid and these complex distributed energy research programs at the lab.
Got it. There's these two words that we use, on-site systems and microgrids. Could you distinguish like how you want your customers to think about this? Like a lot of folks use the word microgrid as proselytized for a lot of different things.
So I would say on-site energy system and microgrid are kind of synonymous. It's just microgrid is, I would say, a more technical term. So centralized power, long transmission lines, distribution lines, substations, all to get power to you. And on-site energy systems or microgrids is what you just put right next to your facility, your building. You own it, you control it, or somebody else owns and operates it for you, but it's right there. So it gives you a level of certainty around the energy that you can expect, the cost of that energy, or what we call the levelized cost of energy, but also ways to make money too. So these systems, usually if you just normally plug something into the wall, you're just paying a bill. Right. But when you have your own way right next to you or right in your facility, or your piece of real estate land that you have available, if you are generating your own power and you're storing your own power, you can also sell it, or you can participate in different ways to support the grid and to support the macrogrid and make money. So you can actually not only stabilize your cost of energy over a very long time. So these tariff rates, you're insulated from them, these tariff rate increases, but at the same time, you can arbitrage opportunity to make a lot of money. And that means you can really treat these as assets that return on the investment that's been made into them. And that's something new, right? In the past, you always just paid a bill.
Right. Yeah. Now, to participate as a market participant is something that it is the great frontier right now of the energy sector.
Yeah.
Xendee, as you've described it, helps to accurately model, optimize, and orient a decision maker around the kind of architecture they want. Is your intention with the product to also provide like signal level controls for that technology? Like, does it sit somehow on site as a energy management system?
That was the fourth piece that we developed. So we wanted to bring confidence and bankability into the plan so that they get financed and these systems would get built. And then once they're built, we wanted to then really address the gap that we saw, which was how can we ensure that the system is actually going to do what the plan promises it's going to do.
Yeah.
And we just launched this product. It's called Operate. It's actually going to get an Edison Award. Our design platform got the Edison Gold Award.
Yeah.
A few years ago, and Operate is getting an Edison Award as well. We don't know if it's a gold or silver or bronze yet. We'll find out next month. Essentially, it's got the artificial intelligence component into it with the optimization, but it understands what the plan is and what it needs to do.
Yeah.
And it also can then feed back into the plan so that two things. One is the next plan is more bankable, more accurate around the outcomes that you can expect. The system's continuously learning, which gives us a compounding advantage. But the other is the plan is not static. People always want to compare, okay, how should I be doing? Based on what I invested in, what I was told I can expect, how close am I, or am I exceeding those expectations? And the current approach that we saw in no way addressed that. And we felt that that was an important final roadblock to remove by integrating operations with a plan and bridging that gap between reality and what the plan said. And it sits on top. It's a piece of software, and it's there to make the energy management systems and the hardware controllers out there smarter. So those controllers and those energy management systems typically have a logic on them, and that logic is more often than not disconnected from what the plan was. Mm-hmm. So we have this brain in the cloud that knows and has the ability to look into the future, and is adaptive and continuously can give recommendations to the hardware controller, the EMS on site, what it should be doing to capture as much profits and savings based on the objective that the customer's given.
How do you handle in the modern, in these sort of modern AI enabled systems, how do you handle dynamic conditions like weather and energy consumption fluctuation, right? So the forecasting is really critical, and our system is smart where it switches between different AI methods as it learns more about that site's needs. Mm-hmm. So it has a multitude of AI technologies, and it automatically, as it learns more, it becomes smarter, it switches to a different one. So kind of like how a kid starts off maybe in kindergarten and then goes to high school and then college and then is a professional. At each stage, your brain gets upgraded. So it upgrades its brain through those stages. And it's bringing in real-time information from weather forecasts. It's predicting around what the load will be, and is trying to really address those peaks so that it could do the peak shaving for you accurately. And it also understands the health of the underlying infrastructure. So if a battery has a fault or an inverter has a fault, it knows that asset is not going to be available for it. So it's now going to reorient its recommendations around that. So it's very adaptive, not only around external events, but also internal events as well, around the health of the underlying assets that, normally you would think the battery's there and you can discharge it or charge it certain times. But if it's got a fault and maintenance hasn't gone to it yet, it knows that. And it says, okay, for the next 72 hours, this is what I think you should be doing to achieve these outcomes. And it makes those recommendations. And every minute it comes up with another set of 72-hour recommendations. So it's a rolling forecast, continuously looking into the future, coming up with the optimal strategy to control the systems. And then it gives that advice to the energy management system or the hardware controller under it. And that allows us to really address systems that have already been built and out there. And new ones that are there. And we're hardware agnostic. So we just make these control systems, SCADA systems, energy management systems smarter. One of the things that I know is at least, I would say on the roadmap, it's something that we have talked about are how to incorporate within this environment of load growth the heavy energy usage of data centers and our desire in a U.S. energy dominance environment to build more data centers. I'm curious about the two areas of convergence around the energy intensity of data centers and the energy intensity of an electric vehicle driven power grid, where not only do we need to service that energy draw, that electrification demand, but we need to do it for cars, especially for transport in a hyper in a much more efficient, fast way. Like the speed of charging needs to increase to replace in the user's mind that this is something that you like can stop at a gas station and fill up and keep moving. Can you talk about those two areas of technology?
Yeah, so they're both. You asked me earlier, what are the three things that need to happen, and those, along with manufacturing that's getting onshored as well. You're seeing some news items around chip manufacturing coming back to Arizona and some other parts of the country.
Things we never
but
saw.
Also heavy industry coming back too, right? Car manufacturing being augmented, all sorts of manufacturing, industrial base being augmented. So that energy demand is growing. But to your point, the energy demand, for example, that fleet electrification requires, or the energy demand that a hyperscale data center for AI requires, is orders of magnitude above what traditionally the grid was able to address. Right. And to build something out like that is decades and very expensive. So when we're looking at fleet electrification, that on-site energy system is pretty much a given, unless you have access to a fairly unloaded circuit where that charging stations need to go. The challenge is the charging stations need to go where they need to go.
Yeah.
And then, so it's not so much that you put it where the grid is available and has the capacity. It's just, that's where it needs to go. That's where the real estate has been decided on. And then how do you fill that gap?
Yeah.
And then how do you fill that gap and make sure that you can still, if there's a grid, you can use it, but you're not going to end up with stranded assets on the grid side. So a microgrid can really fill that gap and also deliver the resilience capability. So if there's a power safety shutoff, some sort of a weather event, the fleet schedule isn't impacted, the business isn't impacted, it can continue to do what it needs. But it is a lot of energy because these are, they can be megawatts per truck. And so planning that in a careful manner and in a stepped approach where you make the investments as the fleet grows and electrifies is going to be critical. So these stepped approaches is really what is essential in having a sound business plan that grows with the demand and at the same time leverages the assets that you're investing in the optimal way to achieve economic outcomes and resiliency outcomes and environmental outcomes. The same thing is with data centers. But what has happened with data centers is the traditional data centers that we have and we will continue to have been all around speed of communications. Just like you and I right now are talking, it's making sure that when somebody's listening to this or watching this, there's no lag, it has a high quality, and it's delivered, whether it's Netflix or Hulu or music streaming, it's all around getting the communication as reliably and efficiently that workload done. With AI, it's fundamentally a different magnitude of energy that's needed because these servers and the GPUs that they run need a whole different level of energy coming into them. And I use this term energy because it's not just the electricity, but the cooling. And the cooling and the electricity are almost in tandem with each other.
Right.
As the workload is happening, the system generates more heat that needs to then be managed. So there's a cooling component that normally, with fleet charging, the thermal component isn't that important. It's managed right with the cables and the equipment is outdoors usually. So data centers, everything is packed very close to each other. The amount of energy you need per rack is going to be very different. And that also needs a stepped approach.
Yeah.
Because you have to have an immediate solution, an intermediate solution, and then the ability to have the flexibility to absorb new technologies. Like, what if 10 or 12 years from now, then these modular reactors become a thing? Well, did you design and plan something to accommodate for that? The same way that you might need to plan for maybe 100 trucks to get electrified, but maybe you need to start initially with 10.
Yeah.
But how do you make an investment in a rational way to achieve the best outcomes to address that? And that's the beauty of microgrids. They can be designed in a way that addresses that flexibility and adaptability that that on-site energy system needs. And at the same time, the grid can be a component of that, where you consume a certain amount from the grid that it allows you, and then the rest you backfill with your microgrid. And if there's a grid failure, you have all those assets available to disconnect and run your operations, and you can reconnect back when the grid is healthy again.
So you guys are out. You guys are out on the front line, seeing the next generation of this technology as it's being not just tested but deployed. A couple of years ago, you did the only significant sort of investment round that you've raised, which is a Series A, and one of the strategics that came into that round is Travel Centers of America. Can you talk a bit about, I kind of look at the fleet electrification ties into this sort of long haul conversation. Is it last mile versus long haul? And anybody that travels sees like Flying J and Travel Centers of America. These are Buc-ee's. They're the places that allow us to have this sort of distributed vehicle culture in America that to drive across the country. Talk to me about what you're seeing on the frontier of ultra-fast EV charging through the lens of this partnership that you have with TA, for example.
TA has a lot of expertise in fueling all these fleets of vehicles throughout the United States. And as the electrification of transportation, particularly on the fleet side, was starting to evolve, they invested in us and partnered with us to help build out these stations that can not only address the electrification needs, but also improve the customer experience for them. A lot of these places, they're almost like, they have almost like a small hotel. I mean, it's not just fueling. They have showers and lockers and exercise areas and all sorts of amenities, including repair centers. So the opportunity with the land and real estate that they had to be able to really put together a compelling offering for their clients around the fleet charging infrastructure needs was an area that we partnered with them on, because, as I said, the real estate is where it is. And in some places, the grid is perfectly fine for what you need today. And there's places where the grid is weak. And with microgrids, you are able to fill the gap, have a solid business case, and a solid technical execution. So it's a lot about de-risking these project outcomes from a financial and technical perspective for our clients. And with all of these systems, it's a fairly new thing. You're used to selling normal gasoline and diesel, and now you have to really be in front of the future wave of different fuel inputs for these trucks, whether it's electric or hydrogen or whatever the fuel source needs to be. And how do you do it? How do you do it in a way that you're de-risking the project financial and technical risks? And that's where we plug in. Through our platform, we address these 4 critical points within a project to make sure that there's a high level of confidence in the outcomes themselves. So that was the interest that they had in us and how we engaged with them.
You can imagine how complex it could be for an organization like Travel Centers 2 or TA2, which is now, I think it's a subsidiary now, BP, but you can imagine how complicated it is for them to address where to invest first, as well as how much in additional energy demand to anticipate? Like, just adding electric vehicle chargers to the stations alone, like, let alone trying to decide, do you focus on the commercial vehicle space versus the sort of the retail vehicle space? I'm wondering if, and I don't know if you have any of this data top of mind, but like, do you have a sense of how near term we're going to see this concept of ultra fast EV charging, and where you think it'll pop up first, as well as I'm curious what the additional load requirements are for a place like, just to put it in perspective, for a place like travel centers.
Ultra fast charging technology is out there. Where we've been seeing it being implemented is actually within the warehouse infrastructure itself. So these distribution centers where the trucks actually go, where the warehouse owner operator, they're already providing, they're almost already a utility for the tenant.
Right.
So, imagine the tenant and they have their own fleet and they're already paying for the thermal and electric load to the warehouse owner.
Yeah.
And this is just an additional service that they can provide them to make sure that, their customer is happy, the tenant is satisfied and wants to continue and grow their business with them. As far as where the trends are, and where the path is, a lot obviously has been on the kind of the coasts, east and west coast, and part of that is just the grid constraints, but also just the cost of electricity itself. By bringing in a microgrid, it just makes a lot of financial sense, where you're essentially addressing the time component, where you don't have to wait for years and years for a grid upgrade and then pay very heavily for that. And that upgrade might end up being a stranded asset anyway, because it's going to get underutilized with, if you're making your own energy on site, how much utilization are you really going to have on the grid side? And at the same time, you're able to deploy it very, very rapidly, because you can put together these energy systems very quickly with a high level of confidence, and the business case is very strong behind them. So that's the trend that we've been seeing in that regard. And really, the grid constraints are the number one challenge that folks are dealing with when it comes to fleet vehicle charging. We've stayed out of the passenger vehicle side of things. We've really focused on the fleet side, and it's just because it's so random. I mean, it's a very different dynamic where you're driving around town. If you are a homeowner, you're going to have a charger in your house. If you're an apartment, if you live in an apartment or some sort of a townhouse or high rise, the garages will start having charging. And if not, then maybe these public charging stations make sense for those use cases. But really, it's these interstate routes where you got to drive a distance and you need to have charging, where I think that becomes a stronger business case, because the utilization of that charging infrastructure is more sound than necessarily if people have an alternative. Previously, with regular cars, you don't have a gas station in your garage. You have to go to the gas station. But with passenger vehicles, you have the ability to put that gas station in your house. It's called an EV charger. And that didn't exist before. So it'll be interesting to see the pattern of behavior. But at least from what I've observed, folks that are traveling between cities and towns, long distances, clearly they're going to need that charging infrastructure. Folks that are living in apartments and high rises, they're going to need it. But the homeowners most likely won't need it. And but where we do have a strong sense around the utilization of these assets is on the fleets, because they have a schedule, they have a route, it's known, and the utilization is understood. And now it's like, how much more opportunity, how much more revenue can you extract out of that infrastructure while still meeting that fleet's requirements and needs? And that's where that microgrid is just so beautifully adaptable and flexible in putting those additional revenue levers in. And that could be demand response. It could be sales back to the grid, all sorts of opportunities that normally you wouldn't have.
Adib, I want to switch gears a little bit here as we round out the conversation and talk a bit about the formation of the company, kind of how you think this is you mentioned that you had formed a company with your father before, and this is a sort of what's called a second rodeo. now with co-founders to other sort of highly respected industry experts. How do you think about, as the CEO, creating a corporate culture? I'd love to hear the nature of that culture. What are some of the values that you hold as an entity? And I'm curious if you give some specific examples of how those values manifest in day-to-day work.
Yeah. Merit and integrity is the foundation of it. At the same time, we're a fairly casual culture, so we don't take ourselves too seriously. We want to make sure everybody feels comfortable communicating, sharing, and offering input. Sometimes with technical folks or just different people, the loudest voice says a lot, and sometimes the most important voice will be very silent. And we want to make sure that every voice is heard, because everybody on the team is there because they bring a lot to the table. As a startup, you really have to be careful about your hires, and you want to make sure you bring on as many A players as possible, because A players attract other A players. And that inherently builds a culture around performance, merit, and the integrity part is just a mandatory thing that has to be there, where we expect everybody to be not only good and honorable, but at the same time have the integrity to do what's right and speak out when they see something that they think could be done better.
Yeah. I've heard it said character, or you could replace this with integrity, is who you are when no one's looking.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, this, selfishly, every entrepreneur wants to hire A players. And I wonder if through now your 2 ventures plus sort of career work, have you found certain modalities that help you identify an A player? Like, how do you solve for, is this an A player?
You just have to get to know people a little bit. So like the way I met Scott, I went to UCSD and I spent a lot of time with him. He taught me. And through that process of learning from the other person, you get to learn a lot about them and who they are, how they communicate. So that's helpful. With Michael as well, I spent close to a year collaborating with him, got to know him, spent a lot of time with him. And then that personality itself attracts the same personality.
Sure.
So
it starts with your co-founders. And then the hiring process follow on to that.
That's all my job is to hire the best people and get out of their way and take all the hits for them so they can stay focused on what they need to do. So it's, if you have really good people, you can deal with the execution risk in a much more reliable way. By that, I mean, you know that you have the best wingman, you have the best experienced hands with you in the car. So you don't have to constantly problem solve for everything all the time. You have a great set of eyes and minds to collaborate with, and that's important.
You've set about to solve some really complex problems, and there are a lot of entrepreneurs listening who are probably listening to your story and appreciating the underlying sort of value bombs that are incorporated into your story. I'm curious if there's a piece of advice that you find yourself over coffee or even just pondering your own journey, like giving this advice to other aspiring entrepreneurs who are trying to solve equally complex problems in clean energy?
Well, first is, okay, you're solving a problem, but is the problem important? Is there another way to solve that problem? And is the problem, the way that you're solving it, painful enough that somebody's actually willing to pay you for it?
Right.
Because you got to get over and understand whether you even have a right to exist. Just because you think you've identified a problem, it still needs to go a couple of levels past that. And those are important so that the work that's being done and the impact that it's going to have can actually be reflected as a business.
And the couple of levels past that I heard is not only is this the way that you're trying to solve that problem. First of all, is that problem need to be solved, and is the way that you're proposing the right best way? But then, more importantly, are people willing to pay you for it because it's a painful enough problem that it's worth money to resolve?
Yeah. That's, I think, a real important piece.
These are two very,
because you can
very
solve a problem and people will say, well, that's great, but then they're not willing to pay for it.
Right.
That's an issue, right? Or there's already alternatives that are good enough.
Right. Yes, a lot of great ideas die on the altar of good enough, because folks will say like, well, she's not willing to pay for that. I think we're going to see that right now in the AI era, that a lot of folks were trying to solve problems for the last decade that AI is going to obliterate.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you wish you would have known going into entrepreneurship that on reflection, like, it would have been, I'm not going to say easier, I just wish I had been prepared for this?
It's always kind of the same set of things. It's going to cost more and take longer than you anticipate. Entrepreneurs, I'll just speak for myself. Generally, we come from the glass half full world.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of optimism, and you have to have that optimism.
Yeah.
To kind of go that route. And that optimism always gets course corrected a little bit at the time. And you just have to be flexible to do that. Maybe the first time for people, it's hard. But once you've experienced it, it just becomes part of nature. It's like, you get in the car and you hit traffic. Okay. You just deal with it, figure out a different way to get to your destination, different routes.
Right.
But if you've never hit traffic before and you're seeing it for the first time, it could be daunting.
Are there any books that you've read more than once, or perhaps you've recommended because of the impact they've had on you?
I don't read books more than once because to me it becomes boring. I mean, I already know.
Okay.
So
well, then we'll take the latter.
Do you want like nerdy books, or do you want like entertaining?
You can take
books?
this into like, if you sit down and nerd out with someone about books, like I could do with you for the next 30 minutes, where would you start?
A book that really opened my eyes around the potential of artificial intelligence is a book by Jeff Hawkins called On Intelligence. And it was riveting for me. I really enjoyed it. And he recently came out with another book called 1,000 Brains. And he's one of those folks that is not only brilliant, but has the ability to express and communicate the very technical area in a way that I can understand. I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm not a expert by any means in expressing through code the neocortex of the brain or any component of the brain, and he is. But he's able to articulate in a way that is just, I found compelling. I read it like end to end. I think in like a day. I mean, it was like, I was just like so blown by it.
That's the one.
So
on
that's
intelligence.
one I really like. Those two books, On Intelligence and then 1,000 Brains.
Yeah.
And then just my own approach to everything is around systems. So another book that I liked, again, these are kind of technical. It was Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows.
Thinking in Systems.
I've always kind of found her view around systems and systems thinking to be very fascinating as well. So those are kind of the nerdy books.
That's helpful.
I guess I haven't read in a long time kind of fun books, but the ones that I do recall, I like these Tom Clancy books. One was The Bear and the Dragon. It was just riveting from page one. And then I really like Rainbow Six as well. So those just for entertainment purposes.
Also Clancy,
but
right?
I've stopped reading and more doing audiobooks.
Same.
So
Yeah. And I
I've switched.
equate, I usually will caveat and say I consider reading as audiobooks as well. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So, but on Intelligence, the Thousand Brains, I think it's best to actually get the book because there's material in it and diagrams and so forth that are very helpful.
Oh, that's good. Actually, I'm so glad that you made that distinction because I usually default to the audiobook. And then if I listen and I'm like, oh God, I need to get the actual physical book, I'll go buy it.
Yeah, those, I think the physical book is helpful because there's examples given that are drawn out, written, and so forth that you can't express through audio.
Good to know.
But yeah, I've kind of defaulted to audiobooks, and just when I go on a walk, I listen to them.
Same.
But Dare and the Dragon and Rainbow Six, I thought were really, really well written, dramatic books.
That's great. I'm going to definitely check those out.
Yeah.
Adib, as we wrap here, I'm sure that folks are going to want to connect both on a professional and personal level. I will link to Xendee on LinkedIn and the website, but for folks that want to connect with you, how do you like to be found?
LinkedIn is great. Conferences is always a good opportunity to meet face to face. You get a lot of people showing up at the same place, so it's really a efficient way for everybody to kind of connect. Those are always great. People should just feel free to come up and say hi, and happy to always meet and talk to fellow energy passionate people. So,
we call them solar warriors, but obviously you're on a spectrum that is more than just solar.
So those are always great. And
do you have a list?
We also
have a list in your mind
of
shows that you're going to, that you're going to be at?
Microgrid Knowledge, going to be at that. Going to be sometimes we also go to RE Plus and RE Plus Microgrids. Those are always big events that we're at, and they're usually between Vegas and Southern California.
Yeah, the Microgrids conference I think is in like next week maybe, but at the time of recording.
So any of these events around distributed energy and microgrids and cogeneration, I try to be at them.
Yeah,
and always looking to make new connections, meet new people, and learn from them.
Our listeners are bought in on the idea that your network is your net worth. So I would not be surprised if folks reach out to you. If you could leave every person that you meet with one thing, Adib, what would it be?
Hope.
I had a feeling you were going to say that, actually.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know why. I genuinely, maybe I just willed that into existence because that was the
important. I think hope is the most important thing you can leave people with and for them to have.
Yeah, well, I am also curious, what will have changed as a result of the work that you and your team are doing?
Wow. What I hope will have changed is that we have been able to help redefine the global energy infrastructure, shifting power literally and I guess figuratively away from these antiquated kind of like mainframe computers, went to distributed networks. I kind of view the central power plants the same way, these antiquated centralized generation systems to smart and resilient distributed cogeneration and microgrids.
Adib Naslé is the co-founder and CEO of Xendee with an X. You can find them at xendee.com because the URL was available. Congratulations on all the success so far. Look forward to seeing much, much more from Xendee. And thank you for the generosity and time that you gave us today.
Thank you for your generosity of your time and for your audience to listen to what we had to share together.
Hey, thank you so much for staying around all the way to the end. I'd love to know what captured your attention the most in this conversation. I also want to say thank you to Adib and Trent Ma and Michael and the whole team over at Xendee for helping make this conversation possible. And I'm so grateful for you listening all the way through and gleaning benefit and value from this episode. If you found it valuable, I would be so honored if you would do two things. One, find the simplest way to share it, either the episode as a podcast episode with a friend or over on LinkedIn, your thoughts or takeaways from the episode as a share or a repost of one of our posts. And the other, and either of these is fine and mutually beneficial for us, is if you could leave a rating and review of our podcast so that others who are looking for this kind of content on the front lines of clean energy, really better understanding how these businesses are being built. If you rate and review the podcast, more people find it. Thank you to the folks, the hundreds who have done so for us in Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I am so grateful. It takes less than 3 minutes. You can go to ratethispodcast.com/Suncast. Finally, a thank you to our sponsors as they help keep the lights on. They pay the bills so that all you have to pay is attention. I am truly grateful that both of those things are true, that we have sponsors who help us financially and that we have listeners like you who benefit from the content that they help enable in this world. You can find out more about them by visiting suncast.media and looking for the sponsor tab. That's also where you can find how you can partner with us to reach thousands of solar warriors and climate champions twice a week, just like they do. Remember, you are what you listen to. Thanks again for showing up, Solar Warrior. It's half the battle.